What is up, guys? We are here today learning how to play turned flush completing cards. So whether you have the nuts, whether you have the flush blocker, or whether you have a more marginal hand like a set, we're going to learn what heuristics mean that you should bet, that you should check back, and how it depends on the out of position player. So when we look at a board like this, we'll have plenty of bets, and when we just get called by the out of position player, we're always going to have the polarity advantage because we didn't get raised. So it takes a lot of nut flushes out of our opponent's range and still keeps all of them in ours. So you will see that the imposition player here is going to check full range on this particular card, and even on other flush cards, they're going to be checking a large percentage of their range. This will vary, and we'll look at that later on, depending on which actual flush card hits on the turn. So if we load up the range for the in position player here in the PLO trainer, we can see that flushes themselves are going to check back half of the time, and nut flushes are going to check back a little bit, and second nut flushes a little bit too, and then basically we're never betting any other flush. No other flush is good enough to bet here. And so we want to think about our value range and when we're actually going to check back some flushes here. And the pretty common heuristic is when you either block too much of your opponent's continuing range, or if you have overkill to the board as well. So things like when you're going to have like 3 or 4 of the nut flush, you're going to have a large check back range. Or if you block a board pair, you're going to have some checking back with 2 pair and sets, because now you make it very hard for your opponent to continue. You have the nuts, you block sets and 2 pairs that he may have and will have to continue with on the turn, and you also don't really need any protection. So there is going to be a good chunk that wants to check back here. Now, when we start thinking about our bluffing range that we want to construct on this board, obviously a lot of it is going to contain flush blockers. So we will usually have to have a flush blocker on this board in order to bluff. And a lot of it is going to be unblocking our opponent's folding range. So if we don't have pairs in our hand, we're going to be more likely to lead. If we unblock straight draws, we're going to be more likely to lead with marginal hands that have a flush blocker, and it doesn't always have to be the nut flush blocker. So that's where we're going to find most of our bluffs from. So if we have a hand here like ace, king, and 4, it's probably a hand that we're going to bet if we have a high spade or even a middling spade, just because we have no showdown value. And we have no real hope for our hand, but some good fold equity. And when we unblock the pairs as well, we can actually go for this barrel on the turn, and we will be able to triple off on many non-pairing runouts, just because it makes up a pretty good portion of our opponent's range when they'll have sets and 2 pairs that we unblock, which will call a pot size bet on the turn, and we'll have to give up on most rivers. So when you think about this particular turn, it is going to give us the polarity advantage, and so it backs up everything that we've just been talking about. But if you switch this card here to the ace of spades on the turn, this is going to change the frequency of betting from both players, and we'll talk about how this is impacted on the population and how they're actually playing. So you will see now that our position player has a significantly larger leading range, 41% versus 0 on the deuce of spades. And this is because on the flop, we don't tend to bet as many non-nut flush draws. So the ace of spades actually removes a huge portion of flushes from our range. And our opponent is going to be calling king high, queen high flush draws, which, obviously now are the nuts on the turn. And he just has a larger portion of nuts in his range, and therefore means that he can develop a leading range, and it will be for a small sizing. So if our opponent checks to us on the ace of spades, we actually have a different proposition on our hands, especially solver versus reality, because a lot of people hear that call with the nut or second nut flush draw, second nut flush at this point. They're not always going to bet it on the turn, because they just kind of either think that the ace is a good card for my range, that I'm going to barrel and bluff more than I probably would, And so you will see people definitely not lead this card, 40% of the time. So that means that their checking range is actually a lot stronger and will mean that we actually have to be a lot more careful when we're finding our bluffs. So even in a solver world, we will have significantly less double barrels on this particular ace run out, and a lot more of them are going to be skewed towards, king 10 sort of hands. As you can see here, king nut flush. And then, similar on the bluffs, but again, if we're betting less of our range, we're going to have less bluffs. And, we're going to have to look at more of our marginal hands and start to check those back a bit more. So that's the point that I want to make on the ace of spades in terms of bluffs and nut value. If we go back to the deuce of spades, one thing that I want to make sure you guys are doing in game is that you're actually betting not just flushes here for value, because we will actually be betting a good amount of sets. So if we have hands like Jack, Jack, and 7-7, we're actually going to be betting like a good portion of the time, and it's mostly going to be when we have a flush blocker, because if we bet pot on this turn with Jack Jack, we can definitely get called by 5-5, and so we can get value from worse for sure, and we can actually start to fold out better. There will be some weak flushes that might even fold on the turn with no backup, but flushes that will definitely have to fold to a triple barrel on the river, where we end up turning our 7-7 or Jack Jack into a bluff in certain scenarios when we unblock the right cards. So what sets are we looking to bet? It's going to be things like top and middle. We're never really going to bet bottom set. We're not going to bet two pairs. So what you want to have is a spade blocker in your hand, and then you also really, on a board like this, want to unblock the straight draws, because when you think about it, the value of your bet is getting him to fold a hand like 6-8 with some additional equity against you, or kind of getting in additional chips against two pair or lower sets. If we have a high spade blocker, there will be some runouts where we do get to bluff, but it'll be a lot rarer, because we don't want to triple off too much when we block the eventual folding range on the river, which is going to mainly contain straight draws with a flush blocker and sets and two pair type hands. So we have to be careful as we move on to the next street, but sets are going to be a large portion of our more merged betting on this turn. So I hope that helps, and I hope it gives some heuristics into how you guys are actually playing flushing turns. And just remember, we are definitely not always betting the nuts here, and we are not always betting the nut flush blocker. So check your frequencies, have a look at trainers like PLO trainer, and see if the solver backs up your play and your concepts that you're applying in game. That is going to be it from me. Thanks for tuning in, and good luck at the tables out there.